Another thing you can do if you have a large area is to pour your paint. I've also done this in layers, but it's a really nice way to get, oops, that's a little too much water, to get paint over a large area. And I am going to mix some paint up. And you can do this ahead of time and even let it sit. Just stir it right before you use it. In order to mix this, I'm not going to use paint from my palette. I'm going to use paint from the tube. I just kind of stick it on the side, and that way I can just keep pulling the amount of paint I want down into the water. So if it seems like it's just a little bit too much paint, I don't have to use it all. So that's why I kind of squeeze it onto the side of the cup. You can just get cheap little Dixie cups or something like that. They have little tiny Dixie cups. I've used those before. It just, I like using disposable. You can use any cup, but if my cup gets too big, I tend to mix too much paint. And so I kind of watch that. I also have color-coded brushes because I do this quite a bit. And when I do this, I typically use my primary colors. As I get darker and darker, I'll sometimes use the leftover paints that you end up in the bottom here. But I do this so that I can keep my brushes straight. Okay, that's a nice vivid yellow. I'm going to make sure that my colors are a little bit brighter than I really need them to be at the end, simply because my paper is going to be wet, and so they'll be diluted. So if they're a little bit brighter than what I think they need to be, then I think it will work out great. So let's see, a little bit more blue. Oh, let's grab a little bit more blue paint here. And the fun thing about this is that it's unpredictable. I mean, the more you do it, the more you can start controlling it, but you can also just let it have its head and see what happens. There, that's a little bit better. So we've got our primaries here, and it does take a minute to mix it up, but I figured that that would be good for you to see how I do that part so that you're not left in the dark. I mean, stirring is stirring, but knowing how much paint to mix with it, or what I ended up with, I think is helpful for you to know. So, using gloves again, because this is kind of a messy process. And I have just a paint tray from the dollar store to capture everything. I could do it over the sink, but I would like capturing my paint instead of having it go down the drain. I don't think I need to put pigment down the drain. And then once it's done, I pour it in this, and then I can use this as a nice dark neutral as I get darker in my painting, and it's got a nice harmony in it because it's got all the same colors. So this is from the baking aisle, and this is from the paint aisle. I have my painting all set up. My drawing is on here, and I have it taped to a acrylic board. And I do this because it's going to be very wet, and then as it's drying, it will keep it flat. If I was using a really thick, like 300-pound paper, the paper in the little green Arches book is 140-pound. So it's not anywhere near as wet or as thick. Then I could just use it without mounting it to something because it's so much thicker. And I find it easier to spray than to brush. just like spraying better. It's a little bit easier. And then you can just turn it sideways so you can see if you've missed anything. Now, one reason I like using the tray, the paint tray, is because if I want my board to tip, I can tip it down like this. If I don't want it to tip, then I can just put it over the top. This is a large painting, so I really don't need this, but this works out really well when I have a small painting. Then I can set it on top of that while I pour. But for this, I may take that away because it's such a large painting, and that way I can have a little bit more freedom here. I'm going to start with my lightest, which is yellow. This dog is going to be kind of a coppery colored dog, and it's going to have coppers and yellows in it, so I want to include those in the background, but I think I may end up with something in the background that is a little bit different than that. And I don't care if it gets on top of the dog because I've already masked out any whites I need. And I know you're probably thinking, this is crazy. But it will all work out. Yeah, I'm going to tip it this way now. And notice I'm not pouring them all everywhere I want to. If I poured each color everywhere, it would all just turn out as a neutral gray, right? But if I can play with those angles and the drips, then I can get some really interesting colors. And I can also go back and add if I need to. If it feels too dark in one area and I don't want it that dark, I can grab my spray bottle and make it a little bit lighter there. Now as it's draining there on the side, play with some of these colors here. I like that I've got a variety so it's not the same top and bottom, and I'm just gonna drink up some of that extra paint there. And this variation right there I think is kind of fun. If I was, as I'm doing this, if I look at the original, let me grab that. So here's a photograph, and I know I have a lot of lights there. While that's still wet, I can come in and just lighten that area as well. But honestly, I think the variety will be really fun. And then what I'm going to want to do, because this is very, very wet and it will just kind of keep dripping, if I find an angle that I like this draining off to, then I want to keep it at that angle if I have to walk away from it. And you can see I'm grabbing all of these little drips on the edge. It just keeps draining and draining. So if I like this angle and yet I turn and do something different, then it's gonna move this way now. I'm gonna grab my finger and fill that in. Just otherwise my eye will go to that. Do you see these speckles here? Though that is dried paint that was in the little jar that I had, so I think it's going to be okay. It'll just dry like that, but it's probably going to make some not blooms, but some little splotches of color, and I'm okay with that. That'll just add a little bit of texture to it. The whiskers here, one of them showed up That's done in masking fluid, and it's hard to see when it shows up, but this is called a drafting pen, I think. And it's just 2 pieces of metal, and this traditionally was dipped in ink. Oh, it's a ruling pen, sorry, that's the name of it. It was used in drafting, but they would dip it in ink, and then you could make a line with it. And then by how far apart you make this go, that's how much will go out. When you use it with masking fluid, you need to make sure that it's a little bit farther apart than you would with ink, because ink is thinner. But that is a fun tool to use if you're trying to get very, very thin lines. And I've got a couple of whiskers there that are masked. And when I'm finished with my painting, or nearly done, then I'll pull that out. If I didn't like these little guys right here, I could just try to pick them up like that if they were bugging me. So if something like this happens to you, and if you've never used the cups before, if they're clean cups, it won't happen. But if you're using a cup you've used before, it might happen. You can lift them up if you need to. It wasn't bothering me at first, and now I'm like, maybe I don't want them there. So anyway, now I've got a large area covered. I don't have to worry about the background, and I can just get right to painting the dog as soon as this dries. I will want to wait till it dries. I don't want to start too soon, and you can see it's wrinkled, so you really have to make sure it's taped down really, really well. I'm going to actually press this tape down with my paper towel so that I can drink anything up while making sure that it's stuck on each of those edges.